policy, I'd say to the lecturers there, my colleagues, look, you know, we cannot ignore the history of this person. We cannot ignore the fact that surrounding me is a massive big kinship network, and you don't see any of those people. You see Kitty Lawson Taupo, the individual. But I'm conscious that all of these people are with me, and that is my kinship and my genealogy, and we can't divorce ourselves from it as Māori people. And what I learned when we were over in the United States is that American Indian people have the same collective reality. Now, they might be sitting as an individual in a lecture hall or wherever they are, but the reality is always a collective one. And so personally, I believe that there is a lot to be said for that collective versus, well, not even versus, as different from that individualistic man as an island unto himself kind of way of being in the world that is absolutely fundamental to the development of Indigenous psychology.
And I think that what we're getting at is that indigenization and integration needs to be happening in parallel lines. So like my experience of this trip that we took to the American Indian Psychology Conference was very striking in the sense that the kind of discourses that the American Indians were using did remind me a lot of Maori discourses. In terms of the desire to privilege metaphysical and possibly supernatural explanations. Now, I'm just really aware that this one of these young men just really gravitated towards me. I argued with him a lot. His name was Jason. I really enjoyed him a lot because he just wanted to carry this metaphysical, and with him it's very supernatural worldview into the academy. And I was just saying, they're going to hammer you, unless you've got a mentor who really is able to nurture that. He's going to kill that in you. Why would you subject yourself to it? And you know what he told me? He goes, I need this. What would you rather I do, rob a bank? Okay? So that even that, the hardest part is where you differentiate and where you integrate. Because the way you integrate can be on a lot of different levels. So Kitty's talking about the most basic level, which is individualism, collectivism. That's probably the most basic level of cross-cultural psychology is this one. But within that, I noticed, for instance, when I spent 2 months in China, I would get tired sometimes of being in Beijing because it's so relentlessly secular. Okay, because they have the Cultural Revolution, which destroyed all the previous belief systems. And what's left there is very secular. So I would go to these temples. The most salient temples in Beijing are Qing Dynasty Buddhist temples. And they're actually, by the way, they're Tibetan Buddhism, because the Qing were Manchus who were in northern China. And so they're really good mates with the Tibetans. And so there are actually very high-ranking Tibetan lamas in Beijing, all right, from that school of Buddhism, which is a very interesting kind of Buddhism. Because it's very much Buddhism fused with Tibet's indigenous animist religion. All right? But when I went to these temples, it was all about asking the gods or God or whatever to give you stuff. It was very secular, as I say. I mean, I'm going to say, I would rather just study hard and get my stuff if that's what I asked for. I'm seeking something different. And so it's really interesting that on that level, the collectivism of East Asia is quite different from the collectivism of Māori and indigenous people, that they want to privilege that supernatural, that I don't want to say supernatural, metaphor, whatever word, saying even all these words in English are not appropriate because as soon as you say supernatural, it has all these connotations. And again, that's why indigenous psychology is typically practiced in the language of the people, because as soon as you say a word like supernatural, it carries all the baggage of 500 years of Western history moving from a supernatural world of Catholicism into the secular rational world of today. So it's like how you integrate is really, really difficult, because you've got to find people who are willing to do this integration, that they want to play with you, because they can play a lot of different ways. And in fact, with this Indigenous Site Conference that I'm going to this evening, I'm going to be talking about Indigenous psychology and First Nation psychology. Because I don't know how salient that's going to be, but at least I'm going to put up that here's one level at which you have to consider indigeneity. And I'm just interested in what kind of reactions that we get from them. So the differentiation is always happening. And I think the harder part is where does the integration happen, and when does it happen, and how does it happen?
See, some people like Tamiiti would say, forget integration.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Tame would be for Tuho sovereignty. So his ideal state would be that Te Urewera would be a sovereign state on its own within, the boundaries of New Zealand. I spent a reasonable amount of time in Rawtuki, and as much as I respect Tame, I have to say, what would the economic basis of that state be? That's my question.
Hunting and fishing licenses.
There's 10,000 people living. There are 10,000 people living there. If they weren't getting the benefit, there would be a mass exodus there. And Tame would accept that. He would accept the fact that the population within Tu'urua would probably halve, and then he would try to rebuild the economy. But that's a pretty rough thing to do. To say half the people have no more basis of living because they're more than half on the benefit right now. And if you're a sovereign state, you don't get the benefit from other people. So there are these really complex issues around this integration versus differentiation. Who holds the sovereignty and the
holds the power?
Yeah, the power. Yeah.
I wonder whether at some stage integration will fall on, like with kind of globalization and things, mixed marriages, we're getting all these different kind of entwining cultures. And I mean, with the Kiwi Chinese work that we're doing, it is an integration at some level. And I wonder whether it'll be those people that will have the knowledge of both sides that will be able to kind of bridge
all the multiple sides.
Yeah.
I
But
think
see,
the
what
more
we
globalised we become, the more Indigenous people want to hold on to their culture and define their boundaries.
It was really complex. The work that Anna is talking about, maybe you can tell a little bit more about your work because it's actually relevant to this. So this is one that would never get the status of an Indigenous psychology of New Zealand because it's very small subgroup, but maybe give them a little bit of background.
Okay, well, we've been looking at Kiwi Chinese, mainly kind of Poltex descendants, I think, is that correct? Yeah. So Chinese people that have been living in New Zealand for generations, and identity and leadership in that group, how they perceive themselves, and kind of, not so much in my research, but we've also been looking at with the recent migrants from China, how they distinguish themselves from the recent migrants and from Kiwis at large. And they have a real commonality with each other, but they make it very clear that that's not because of discrimination from the outside, but rather that they feel comfortable and value each other as a group.
So it's quite a distinctly different psychology